Today we're going to go over the process to quickly and easily remove layer lines on your 3D printed models and go from a bumpy surface to a smooth one so they won't show up in the final painted product. The uneven surface created by the rounded edges of the plastic extrusion in FDM 3D prints makes it difficult to get a smooth painted surface when finishing prints. The layers create small hills and valleys that only get more visible when paint is added to the surface. When the surface is flat and vertical, the effect is not as bad, but as a slope is added, the gaps are amplified. One solution is to try to sand down the surface to make it flat, but the problem is the plastic is pretty tough, and sanding will take a lot of time and effort. One option is to spray multiple layers of a thick primer and sand between coats, but this takes quite a while to build up enough layers to get a smooth surface, and you have to wait for the paint to dry between each coat. Also, you don't have much control on what gets covered with the paint, which can result in some loss of detail. A better solution is to use a spot putty. This is an air-dried filler used to fill small imperfections in auto body repairs. You simply cover all areas you want smoothed out, let it dry for a few hours or overnight, and then sand off the excess. And because it's much easier to sand than the plastic, it's a much easier process overall. So keep watching and you can find out how you can go from this to this. We'll use this print of a building from the Star Wars tabletop game as a test case. First we need to clean up any rough edges on the print and give the whole thing a light sanding with a 120 grit paper to knock down any high spots or remove any imperfections. So here's the results after the initial sanding. Now it's time to add the putty. You can just use your fingers to spread it around any uneven surfaces. Also, a popsicle stick or any flat-edged tool works well on flat surfaces. Here I'm lightly sanding with 120 grit paper. The goal is just to remove the excess putty to get down to a smooth surface. You also want to scrape out any edges or seams that may have been filled in with putty accidentally. that it's all sanded down, it's ready for primer. Here's a close-up showing how the putty filled in all the gaps between the layer lines. And here it is after a coat of primer. The primer would have filled in any other gaps or small imperfections, and now it just needs a light sanding with 220 grit sandpaper. Now that the sanding's all done, it's ready for paint. Here's some more close-ups to see what it looks like after sanding. And also here's an example of an area that had no putty applied to it. Now we'll just go through the painting process. We'll add a base coat, some shading, some accents, and so on. Here's a close-up example of an area after painting. You can see the area that had the putty applied is very smooth compared to the crate that had no putty applied to it, and you can definitely see all the layer lines. Now we just need to add the color accents. Sometimes when using thick acrylic paint, it does a decent job of covering up the layer lines also. Since the skirt around the outside of the model is supposed to be dirt piled up against it, I decided to add some actual sand. So here I'm just using CA glue to lay down over the area, and then just sprinkling sand over top of it to stick to it. And here's what the final result looks like. For another example, I printed off a dome to see how well this process would work. Here's just the raw print. Now coated in spot putty. Then sanded down. A layer of primer applied and then sanded down again. Then a second layer of primer applied and sanded down with 600 grit sandpaper. Now we're ready to paint. The surface has a bit of a texture to it, but we'll wet sand this with 600 grit sandpaper to smooth it out before we add a top coat. And here's the final result. If you really wanted to achieve a mirror finish, it would just be a matter of repeatedly wet sanding and adding more top coats. So thanks for watching, and it'd be great if you could hit that like button if you think this will help you on your future projects. Also, let me know in the comments what your thoughts are on this process.